The Tom Woods Show, episode 2301.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Folks, I don't know about you, but I am running into a lot of progressives saying, look, police, fire, schools, these are all great examples of socialism. Well, let's focus on that school example. I've got a free ebook called Education Without the State that makes a pretty darn good case for a stateless approach to education. Pick it up at nostateeducation.com. Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. So glad to have Carol Markowitz back with us. She's got a brand new book out, of which she is the co-author, Stolen Youth, How Radicals Are Erasing Innocence and Indoctrinating a Generation. She's a columnist for the New York Post, although a refugee out of New York. According to Trump, that had nothing to do with how good Florida is, only with how bad New York is. I say, why can't it be both?
Yes, that's exactly right. 36,000 New Yorkers changed their driver's license last year from New York to Florida specifically. I don't think that's just because of the weather.
Yeah, right. So, all right, well, let's talk about your book, but in particular, let's start off with, there's been a bit of drama, let's say, associated with the release of the book and events that you've held.
Yes.
Because you are obviously striking, you're sticking the proverbial dagger through the heart of the vampire here, and the other side has taken notice, let's say.
Yes. Thank you for having me on, Tom. I love being on your show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been an exciting week or so, and it's been amazing to see the reaction from people, but it's also, we've had some negativity. We had protesters crash our New York City launch party. We actually think it was two separate groups of protesters, but they were loud and throwing drinks. The first group screaming Black Lives Matter, which doesn't have anything to do with our book. And they were really the perfect synopsis for us about what we are trying to avoid our children turning into. You know, I said to my kids, like, I will consider your upbringing a success if you're able to walk by a book party where you don't like the book and don't throw drinks at anybody. I think that's really step one in being a successful adult.
And not to mention, obviously, haven't even read the book. You don't even know what the book is about.
Right. Yeah, we don't know how much they knew about us or how they came upon us. But yeah, obviously they haven't read it. Obviously they won't read it because they won't ever want to be confronted with any information with which they might disagree. And that's really the kind of conformity that we talk about a lot in the book and want our kids to not fall into.
In a way, you would almost want to set up something like this. They're so dumb. This is exactly what you want. I think the statistic is still about the same, where every year, close to 200,000 new titles are released. Books are some of the most difficult things in the world to sell, and to stand out from the other 199,999 is very, very hard. So if the other side's going to hand you publicity like this,
right,
then take it.
We definitely made the most of it. We talked about it. We went on TV and talked about it. But I have to admit, it doesn't feel great when you're with your friends and you're celebrating.
No, it doesn't.
The launch of your book. The thing is, it was a media party specifically. And so we only had a few, what I would call normie friends there. Like, I think I had maybe 8 friends there who were not working in media. So most of the room immediately was like, oh, we didn't get that on video, you know. But the friends of mine who don't do this for a living and are not in the public eye, not to say that they were rattled, but they were definitely like, wow, this really happens, huh? This is a real thing that really happens to you.
Yeah. And I remember, like in my own case, when I was a young author and the New York Times didn't like one of my books, it really devastated me. Not like I expected them to like it.
Right.
I just expected them to shut up about it. And so I'd love to be able to tell you, oh, I knew this was going to earn me street cred, and I was so excited. I wasn't. I was thinking, I don't know, is my career over? I didn't know what to make of it. So yeah, it may seem fun to outsiders, but it's really not, actually.
Right. It's a mixed thing. Again, we knew that having protesters meant something positive about our book, but it still didn't feel great that Bethany, my co-author, and Steve Forbes, who happened to be a guest at our party, got hit with drinks. We'd rather that not happen.
Right. So I want to start off by asking you, are you familiar with a guy named Conor Boyak and the Tuttle Twins children's book series? Okay.
Yes, of course, yeah.
So Conor has written a children's book series that introduces children to certain concepts, like the old essay by Leonard Read, I, Pencil. And so you learn about the way markets coordinate production and, innocent enough, right? Innocent enough.
Right.
But the way he's been treated is, oh my goodness, he's indoctrinating children and what kind of crazy agenda does he have? But he's like one guy.
Right.
This is all they do 24 hours a day in all the major institutions of our society. But Conor is the one they have to go after.
Right, exactly. It's so funny that we can have books like board books for little children called A is for Activist, and that's somehow okay. But Conor Boyak releasing a book, that's not okay. Also, do you know Chaya Raichik? She's the creator of Libs of TikTok. She has a children's book out right now. And obviously, she's getting a very similar kind of pushback. Her book is about kids not keeping secrets from their parents. And just an obvious one.
Yeah,
but
right.
She's being treated as if she's just the worst person ever. Her book is called No More Secrets. And it's just like, how dare she want parents to know what's going on with their children?
Yeah. And of course, she wouldn't even have had to write this book if it weren't for these very people, right?
Exactly.
It's not like she thought one day, like, I'll try and propagandize children as I'm trying to defend them.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about, so in your book, you cover quite a few topics. So you go through COVID, we talk about crazy things being taught in schools, talk about transgender stuff, but the idea of woke and wokeness is all over this book. And so,
yeah,
I remember Trump being in one of the debates and being asked about critical race theory, and he just had no idea. He had no idea really what it was. And so Joe Biden was able to get away with saying, well, I think we can all agree that we shouldn't call people nasty names. And so that was the way it was left.
Right.
And he was just totally unprepared. So what exactly, if we were to say wokeness is advancing certain propositions, what would they be?
For me, the definition of wokeness is not even so much advancing leftism, although obviously it is. The difference for me between leftism, which is always being pushed in college or in corporations, and wokeness is the forced conformity of it. So the kind of funny example that I like to give is like the old leftism is getting a women's studies degree. The new wokeness is getting a women's studies degree, but not being able to define woman. And that's where we are right now, where you're not allowed to talk about certain concepts. You're not allowed to talk about, there's a very narrow way of speaking about things. You can't say, I'm not racist. You have to say, I'm anti-racist. That is the word that we use now, and you must use it in the exact right way. Otherwise, you're out. And that's wokeness to me. It's not just leftism. It's leftism coupled with a very totalitarian, forced conformity. And if you dare step outside the line, you could get into big trouble.
In your chapter, No Subject is Safe, where we find that there's propaganda in one subject after another where you would think there couldn't possibly be. What do you say to people, though, who would say, oh, people like you are just focusing on the extremes because you want to rile people up, but that's not what's going on in a typical mainstream school?
Well, I would say that it absolutely is going on in a typical mainstream school. But then even if, okay, let's say I agree with you. Let's say I say, yes, it's a minority of math books that have racial examples in them. It's a minority of math books that try to push politicized math problems. It's a minority of school libraries that have pornographic materials in them for little children to see. Fine. Let's say we agree with that premise. So now what? Can we get rid of those things? Well, then that becomes, well, no, we can't get rid of those things. Well, then that's the issue to me. I'm willing to say that this is not all schools. This is not all classrooms. This is not all books. Fine. But then when we come to the agreement that it does exist in some number, what's the action we're going to take about that? So, obviously they come to the point where they won't take the action. What's happening right now in Florida, where Governor DeSantis is like methodically going through school libraries and pulling out actual pornographic material, not like racy material, literally porn. And all these people are like, no, this doesn't exist. And the DeSantis team is able to provide lists of schools where these books were in the library. Well, if you say it's not every library in Florida, okay, but what about the ones where it exists? Can we take those books out, or are we still book burners?
I think one of the ways they're getting away with this, well, maybe not that completely crazy stuff, but is the language they use when they say, We just want to have everybody feel included and feel like they belong.
Right.
And nobody wants to say, well, I don't want people to think they belong, So they put people like us on the defensive because we have to explain ourselves because they're using such benign sounding language. But then you have episodes like I'm sure you saw what happened at Stanford with that federal judge Duncan coming along and the students shouting him down. And then the DEI dean in quotation marks, shows up to criticize not the students for disrupting his speech, but him.
Right.
And so then you realize, wait a minute, maybe it isn't really about making sure everybody's included. Maybe it's a power play, meaning that we're included and we set the agenda and you sit down and shut up. That's the harsh reality of it, isn't it?
Of course. And we opened the book, Stolen Youth, with a chapter on history. Every totalitarian society in history always says that they're doing the best for the people. I mean, they're just pushing equality, Tom. Why are you against equality?
Right.
And that kind of language is used by all kinds of tyrants. And you're absolutely right, where when we have situations where a speaker is being shouted down, it's always from one direction. It's never the other way. It's never a leftist speaks on campus and a bunch of campus conservatives show up and make noise, make sure that they can't speak. That just is not what happens. Shutting down of speech is, to me, the signature requirement of wokeness. They can't let an alternate opinion be aired, because what if that opinion convinces people? What if people end up thinking for themselves? And when you need people to conform to your narrow way of thinking, letting them hear other opinions, I mean, in the Soviet Union and other totalitarian societies, just was not allowed. That's by design. That's to make sure that everybody stays equal.
Obviously, the schools are the center of what's going on here. And the idea there is that if we want to push through a social revolution, we're going to have to go around people who hold traditional views. And that's everybody over a certain age, potentially, at least potentially. And so therefore, we have to go right to the students. We have to go right to the kids and go over their parents' heads. And I guess what I want to know is, in putting this book together, were you able to pinpoint when this all began? Because when I was growing up in the 80s, I knew that in my school, I was somewhat politically aware that I was getting history taught from a moderate Democratic Party point of view. And maybe they would, toward the end of my time in secondary school, in high school, maybe it was we should be recycling or something. This would all be annoying, but I wouldn't feel like my child's mind has been colonized.
Right.
I mean, was there a moment or was there a phase or something where this just took off?
We can't pinpoint exactly, but there's so many things in the book that we discovered that I'm such an optimistic, happy-go-lucky person that I was shocked by it. Just things like Marxism throughout our American society is so insane to discover. But, in teachers' colleges, they use a book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. That's in teachers' colleges, and it's literally a Marxist text. It covers the kind of critical theories that we now know, to be so harmful. And this is what teachers are indoctrinated themselves with. So I don't know when that book, it's by Paulo Freire, became part of the teacher's curriculum, but stuff like that was scary to discover. The other main, we talk about schools a lot, but the really scary chapter of the book for me was one written by my co-author, Bethany Mandel, and it's about medical conformity and the way that medical doctors are taught, and not only taught, the way that they have to, in order to get into medical school, they have to just parrot so much nonsense, so much leftist claptrap in order to even be accepted, that we're not getting doctors of the highest quality. And the doctors that are there are afraid to say what they actually believe. So if I had to point to something that really scares me for the future, it's that.
There was a bit of a contradiction, it seemed to me, during the COVID years with regard to the issue of schools. And you go into this in quite a bit of detail about what was done to kids in the name of COVID, and really in the name of, as you say, you have a sentence in here, I can't find it just now, but where you say that kids suffered tremendous damage, more or less so that some adults could follow the politically fashionable trend. I mean, it was something like, I'm paraphrasing, something like that. But on the one hand, they absolutely have to have those schools in order to program kids into certain ideas that they're not going to get where they want to be without it. But on the other hand, so many of them were pushing to keep those institutions closed. And the longer they stay closed, the more parents are going to become skeptical about them. They're really going to realize, wait a minute, my kid online is able to get everything done in 2 hours. What is he doing all day? Or there was a spike in homeschooling, which of course the educational establishment doesn't like.
Yeah.
So were they really such hypochondriacs that they were willing to sacrifice their whole program of social reconstruction for 2 years?
No, I think that they thought that they could do that program of reconstruction online. I think that they just believed that they could still control the narrative even though the kids were at home, which actually turned out to not be true. The parents got to see something that they don't generally get to see, and they wanted it stopped. So it was really a mistake on their part. I mean, New York City lost, I think at last count, it's like 300,000 students out of its public schools. That's a giant number. And, I think it was 1.1 and now it's like 800,000. So it's an insane number of kids that left the public school system, and they left for all the woke nonsense reasons. It might not be all the same reasons. Like some people left because merit was no longer part of New York City schools. Like they just keep attacking merit and doing away with any kind of rigorous classes. Some people left because of the CRT nonsense they saw or the gender conversations that they heard. Some people left because they moved to saner states and they couldn't wait out when the schools would eventually open in New York City. But it was a real big miscalculation by the left to close schools for as long as they did, when the point is for them to push their message.
Early on in the book, you share some statistics about people's political self-descriptions, let's say. And what you conclude is that people who we might describe as ideologically committed to wokeness are very much in the minority, more than you might realize. And of course, you wouldn't realize that because it's so ubiquitous. You think, well, I guess at least half the country, maybe 2/3, 3/4 are buying into this. And then you look at the numbers and it doesn't seem to be the case. So isn't that fascinating and interesting and maybe an object lesson for people like us? How is it possible that a minority of people have somehow completely won the day in terms of dominating the way we look at the world and dominating the agenda?
Well, they're loud, and they also are, again, they push a conformity of thought that if you step outside of it, they, attack you. They actually end up doing so much better with people on the left and keeping them in line, obviously. Like I always used to say, you can't really cancel me. You could call my boss and tell them that you don't like something I wrote. Like my boss is going to love that. I don't have a problem with that at all. But that's because I'm on the right and I'm openly on the right, and there's really not much you could do to me. But if you're on the left, they come for them so hard that you see the self-flagellating that people on the left do. I mean, the author of a book called American Dirt pulled her own book a few years ago because she got such rabid attacks. She wrote a book about the Mexican drug trade, and it turned out she's not Mexican, so how dare she? And so they're able to push that conformity on people on the left, and they're able to get these corporations and organizations to be under their thumb. They say to them, you're racist, you're sexist, you're a bigot, etc. And people really respond to that. What we need to do is shrug them off and say, I don't care what you say, and your opinion is irrelevant to me. But that's not what like the Disney worlds of the world do. That's not what the Disney Corporation does. They end up giving these people power and letting them take control and really driving them into the ground.
I assume you've been as surprised as I have at just how quickly an issue like so-called school choice, which was kind of on the fringes, a lot of people talked about it, but it just seemed impossible because the political forces arrayed against it were so great that maybe it would never get traction. Suddenly it's getting massive traction. It's getting massive traction in large part because of one person, Corey DeAngelis, who is a superhuman.
Fantastic.
I mean, the guy will go down in history. I don't know how he's done it, but how do you think this could bear on this issue?
I love Corey. I love school choice. I love everything that he's doing. It just concerns me that I think that people are seeing school choice as like a shorthand, easy solution instead of fighting for our schools. Most people send their kids to the local public school still. Even the ones that want to get out, there's not enough charter school seats or private school seats to accommodate people who want to leave. I talk to so many people that build charter schools or have charter school networks, And they say they have these really long wait lists. So yeah, eventually I hope we get to a point where every single child who wants a choice out of their public school can have one. But I don't want Republicans to just see this as like, oh, I passed a school choice law and now I don't have to do anything else. I still think we need to root out a lot of the leftist influence in our public schools. And there's going to be a lot of kids who don't get to get out of those public schools. So we have to do it for them. They shouldn't have like their math replaced with neo-Marxist theories. I think that it's really important that we fight for the schools and we fight for school choice at the same time.
And not just do it for them, do it selfishly for yourself. You don't want to inhabit a society filled with people who have destructive ideas that are incompatible with a functioning civilization. And I might say to my libertarian audience, I know a great many of them are devoted to homeschooling, and that's great. I can't support that more strongly, but I think some of them feel like, well, pull your kid out, homeschool your kid. And I agree with that. But as you say, for whatever reason, the vast majority of people will not do that. And so in this world that we live in now, where most people won't do that, and most people will be educated by these schools, there's nothing wrong from a libertarian point of view with running for school board and saying, given that it's a taxpayer-funded school, if it's a private school, they make their own decisions. But I'm contributing to this thing. I'm going to have a voice in what's done here. And I prefer, it's bad enough my money's taken from me in the first place, but to add insult to injury, you're going to undermine the civilization I inhabit with that money? I don't think so. That's the attitude you should have.
Yeah, absolutely. Because this does have a wider effect than just individual children. That's exactly how I look at it also. And I have 2 kids in public school, 1 child in private. And again, I love the idea of homeschooling. My co-author, Bethany Mandel, homeschools her 6 children, but that's just not feasible for everybody. It's not feasible for our family. I know a lot of families that just could not possibly make that work. So we have to give them a better shot. And in the book, we teach people how to fight back through a variety of ways inside their schools. But like you said, this leftism is deeply unpopular. So step 1 is just recognizing that you're part of the majority and joining with other people to fight back.
Hey, everybody, quick sponsor message. We're still in the first quarter of 2023, so it's not too late still to try to implement those New Year's resolutions and become the person you want to be in 2023. How about being the most impressive person in the room? Not a know-it-all. That's different. A charming, knowledgeable person people wonder about. How did that person get to be so interesting and know so much about so many things and be able to participate in and hold conversations on such a wide array of topics? Well, the answer is the Blinkist app. Now, you don't have to tell them that that's what you're using, but that'll be what you're using. Blinkist takes thousands and thousands of nonfiction titles over dozens of subject areas and breaks them down into 15-minute chunks. So in 15 minutes, I can get all the key takeaways from the entire book. I can read it or I can listen to it while I'm driving in my car. So as I'm driving in my car, if I have even a 30-minute drive, I can be mastering 2 books. How about that? Sometimes Blinkist will take a bunch of books on a similar topic and bunch them together so that it's easy for you to consume all of them one right after the other. And one of them that I've been doing is the 14-day personal growth challenge. I find that books like this will have 3 or 4 really great insights, but otherwise it's 10 hours of my time wasted. I'd rather just get the 3 or 4 insights in the 15 minutes, and that's exactly what I'm getting thanks to Blinkist. Right now, Blinkist has a special offer just for our audience. Go to Blinkist.com/Woods to start your 7-day free trial and get 25% off a Blinkist premium membership. That's Blinkist, spelled Blinkist, Blinkist.com/Woods to get 25% off and a 7-day free trial. Blinkist.com/Woods. And now for a limited time, you can even use Blinkist Connect to share your premium account. You'll get 2 premium subscriptions for the price of 1. Now let's take a few minutes to talk about the issue that concerns me the most, and that is the transgender thing. Because as even Bill Maher said, kids go through phases. Remember the old days when we used to understand that kids go through phases? But if they even start to slightly hint that they're going through a phase, we have people now who want to pounce and immediately change that, and not necessarily through surgery, but through ideology, change that person's self-understanding forever. And I don't want that being done to anybody in my family.
Okay.
And you see these families get torn apart where one parent wants to support, quote, with gender-affirming care, what the child allegedly wants to do and the other parent does. This is a leftist's dream in terms of getting into the heart of the family, invading the family, tearing it apart, turning it against itself. Horrible.
It really is. And, you were saying, it feels like half the country is leftist. Before we left New York, my 12-year-old daughter had friend after friend after friend after friend come out as trans. And most of them came out as non-binary because that's the easiest one. You don't really have to do anything for that one.
Right,
You get to stay yourself, but you get to have like cool points. But at one point I asked her, like, what percentage of the country do you think is trans? And she had some like astronomical percentage, 60. Like, I think she thought like more, majority of the country is trans. When that's what you see around you, that's what you think it is. And it's such an obvious social contagion. I think to me, what's so crazy about the way this is treated is I have liberal friends who say to me, I realize that this is a phase that these girls are going through because it's almost entirely girls going through this, but they won't say that out loud. And they won't admit that it's a phase because you're not allowed to use language like that. You have to affirm, affirm, affirm. And when you say that it's a phase and that they probably will grow out of it and go back to the gender that they were, quote unquote, assigned at birth, they're not allowed to speak that. And that's so terrifying to me that they know how damaging it is. They know how bad this is for the individual people. They know how bad it is for society. And they don't feel like they can speak on it. And that's really I love that people like Bill Maher are saying, what they really think about it. But you can't just have one Bill Maher. It has to be a lot more people on the left have to grow a backbone and say what they really believe on this.
One assumes that, given that it seems to me a lot of young people are getting drawn into this who in other times the thought would never even occur to them. And if they are having odd feelings, they would pass, they would work through them. But now they have this whole apparatus. It seems that there have to wind up being a lot of people who say, I was chewed up and spit out by the transgender industrial complex that immediately saw me as a poster child for their agenda. To heck with what's best for me. They're going to do what they want to do to me and convince me that it's the best thing for me. It seems like those people are going to wind up being the most compelling spokesman to put a halt to this.
Right. Except the dismissal of them is that they are a small percentage of the trans community, which we don't know. Just because you're an outspoken detransitioner doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of other people who detransition who don't speak out. So this is exactly why the medical part is so concerning to me. If you cannot be a psychologist right now and have a child come to you and say, I'm the wrong gender, and do anything for them but affirm that they're the wrong gender and give them suggestions on how to proceed with changing that gender, that's the only path that you're allowed to offer them. And that's so terrifying. Like the fact that we've allowed the medical field to become so subjective and just rigid in its really bizarre thinking. That's really what I think we need to focus on more than anything else. I think the licensing of the medical field has to be scrutinized and changed rapidly because they're doing so much damage.
Obviously, if you were to ask people who are deeply involved in this movement, why are you doing this? They would say, because I want to help young people who are otherwise going to suffer tremendous mental anguish. So maybe some of those people are sincere. Maybe they honestly believe that this is the thing they need to do. Do you think that's true of all of them? I don't know. I'm asking you to speculate on something you can't possibly know the answer to.
Well, I'm sure that is true. I really do give people the benefit of the doubt. I have no doubt that they think that this is the best path. But the woke angle of this, where you're not allowed to consider any other possibilities, is the problem here. It's that they won't even entertain the possibility that they're doing the wrong thing. And that's what's so scary and so damaging. Look, would they give the same benefit of the doubt to like the people on the other side who also say, we want to do what's best for the children. We're trying to help these kids, these confused kids who often have severe mental health issues. And we're trying to help them find the path back to being mentally healthy again. Of course, they would never say that. They call us transphobes and that's it. But yeah, I'm sure that there are a lot of people on the left who think that they're doing good work. But if you're not allowed to entertain that little voice that tells you perhaps you're not doing good work, then you're not in a position where you can even be honest. So despite how good or bad they are, I think that what we're doing overall is very bad and needs to be stopped.
Well, let me wrap up with this. You're a mom, of course. I've read you talking about that as a consideration as to why you left New York. Isn't that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So how do you parent in 2023? In what way is your parenting different than, say, if you were raising children in 1923?
I think I have to lay down so many of our values at home, which is awkward conversations and often difficult to convey to kids. But I think that we end up talking a lot more at home on how to defensively live outside the home. I send my kids out into schools where they're out in the world, they're possibly being targeted for indoctrination, and I want them to be able to recognize it. And so I have 13, 10, and 7. I mean, my 7-year-old is like still half puppy, but my 10 and my 13 are very aware when someone is giving them their opinion instead of the facts, or when they're being targeted to believe a certain thing and only believe it one way. I think that the most important thing we can do for them is raise resilient children who can be out in the world, be themselves, and stand up for their beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, that word resilient, though, I know what you mean by it. And I know it's in your book. I totally understand. It's just that they've so poisoned that word during COVID.
Yeah.
Kids are resilient. And you know what? They are. That's true. I mean, in fact,
They are.
I was just thinking the other day, I have a friend in the UK, Dominic Frisby. His father, Terence Frisby, wrote the play and then later movie with Goldie Hawn, There's a Girl in My Soup. Well, anyway, Dominic Frisby, during the lockdown, took an old screenplay that his father had written. Father had died by then, and worked on it to create a show out of it. And it's called Kisses on a Postcard. And it's about all the children in London who were relocated to avoid the German bombings. And they were relocated far into the English countryside. And they were raised by different people for years. And they came back and seemed to have been okay. So I thought to myself, geez, I guess they are resilient. I mean, I guess the COVID crazy people are right. I guess my view is I don't want them to have to be. That's
right.
just it, you know?
That's it. Yes, they are resilient. They are. But why are we doing this to them? Just to show how resilient they are? We're taking away everything that matters to them just to be like, oh, they'll be fine. Needlessly, none of this helped. None of the school closures or ripping kids all of their activities or keeping them in masks for years, none of that did a single thing to fight COVID spread. So we forced kids to be resilient for absolutely no reason. And the thing is also so again, my 7-year-old, he was like in pre-K when COVID hit, and then he like missed most of kindergarten and etc. Yeah, he's probably back on level now. But when he first got to Florida, he was clearly behind where the kids here went to school every day and the kids in New York didn't. You know, we moved him to Florida. We got him a tutor. We get him help. We work with him at home. Not everybody has those options. I grew up in like a really rough part of Brooklyn. So when COVID hit, the people that I knew that were like at home ordering DoorDash and like working on their laptops, I'm sure they had a very nice experience being home. But the people that I knew that I had grown up with who don't work on their laptops, who work outside the house, who have jobs that require them to be out, and who don't have a lot of money and don't have all the options for their kids. Like, I felt like I had to keep fighting for them because nobody cared. None of the laptop class, none of the pajama class that I called them cared at all that the options available to them was not available to other people. And that, yeah, their kids, it's much easier to be resilient when your parents can give you everything. It's a lot harder to be resilient when your parents can't.
Well, the book is Stolen Youth, How Radicals Are Erasing Innocence and Indoctrinating a Generation, co-authored by our guest, Carol Markowitz. Well, I'm glad it's doing so well. I hope you move from success to success with it. It's urgently needed, and I appreciate it very much and your time today. Thanks again.
Thanks so much. Love being on with you.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit TomWoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.